Hi, I'm Scott Mansell and welcome to Driver 61's in-depth analysis of how a Formula One pit crew can now complete a pit stop, including changing 4 tyres in less than 2 seconds. I'm going to take an in-depth look at how these 23 team members all coordinate together to put together a perfect pit stop. And I'll use frame-by-frame footage to analyse the role of each individual member and the important role that they play during the pit stop. Now, pit stops have come a long way in the last 60 years. In the 50s and 60s, they used to take upwards of a minute to change some tyres and refuel the car. That's gradually come down, and as the rules have changed, we're down to now a 2-second pit stop in modern day Formula One. Not only are there more team members involved in Formula One pit stops today, but they're more well organised, they train more, and they have better tools to help them get the driver back out on the track as soon as possible. So as you can imagine, with 23 team personnel involved, it can get very complicated. So first of all, we're going to take a look at the whole crew and what each individual or group of team personnel actually does during the pit stop. So we can see Felipe Massa coming into his pit box here, and the pit crew are about to crowd around the car and do their jobs. So first of all, we have the two jackmen, the front jackman here lifting the car and the rear jackman here. Next up we have the groups of pit crew who are changing the tyres. We have 3, although it's difficult to see here, on the front left. We have 3 here on the front right, we have 3 here on the rear right, and 3 here, although one of them's hidden again, on the rear left. Then we have a couple of pit crew to stabilise the car and clean anything if there's anything that needs to be fixed on the car as well. We have 2 here in the middle of the car and 2 here at the front. And then we have a couple of pit crew who are there to make sure that everything's finished and release the car and Felipe back into the pit lane and into the race. So this gentleman here is in charge of releasing the car and in charge of the traffic light that controls Felipe before he goes into the pit lane, as well as this guy at the back. And obviously we can't forget the driver, who has an important role of bringing the car into the pit lane and stopping it correctly on his marks. So here's Felipe in the centre of the footage here. Now we're going to go into detail of what each of the pit crew actually does during the 2-second pit stop. So it may look like the driver just casually drives into the pit lane, stops and lets the pit crew get on with changing the wheels and tyres. But there's a lot of time to be made as you come into the pit lane and hitting your marks properly when you do come to a stop. So here we are on board with Felipe Massa. Now he's got the car slowed down, he's coming into his pit stop, and you can see he's spotted his pit crew all the way up here. He begins to take the car from the fast lane of the pit lane and bring it into the pit box area. Now he's focusing on getting the car slowed down, and you can see here actually there's a change in the surface of the pit lane. It goes from asphalt on the left over here to concrete on the right. So obviously the concrete won't give you as much grip as the asphalt on the left, and that's another consideration that you have to take in mind when you're coming into your pit stop. So at this point, all he's focusing on is the big white line in the middle to get the car in the middle of the pit box, and these 2 yellow and red markers here that the front 2 tyremen are holding. Now that's to mark where the centre of the front wheels should stop exactly, and that's what Felipe will be focusing on here, to get the car stopped in exactly the right area so the pit crew have the easiest job to change the tyres. So he's bringing the car into the middle, he's got it fairly well centred, and he stopped exactly on his marks. Then all the pit crew go and do their job, they change the tyres, and all Felipe will be doing now is holding the clutch in, making sure the car's in first gear, and watching the traffic light on top here. At the moment you can see that it's red, but as the pit crew change the tyres very quickly there, drop him, and now it's gone to green. So as soon as that happens, and it's exactly as the car comes down onto the floor again, it's gone to green, he's released the clutch, and away he goes. And as you can see, I mean, it just all happens so quickly. So let's watch that again in full speed so you can see from a driver's point of view how quickly it all happens. It's just absolutely incredible. So once the driver comes into the pit box and actually comes to a stop, or almost comes to a stop, it's a frenzy of activity. Next up, we're going to take a look at the 2 jackmen, or rather the 4 jackmen who are there ready to pick the car up so that the tyres can be changed. So again, we're looking at this overhead view of Felipe coming into the pit box. Now, the people you need to look out for are just here. So we have the front jackman, the spare front jackman here, the rear jackman, and the spare rear jackman who's just coming into shot over here. So the reason that we have these spare jackmen is because the jacks are now getting more and more complex. In order to pick the car up and drop it very quickly, they have to have quick release systems. So if one of these gets stuck or it doesn't pick the jack up properly, they've got a spare just there to nip in and pick the car up if needed. Although the pit stop speed is incredibly important, actually doing it consistently is more important. If you make up a tenth on every single pit stop, but then in one of them you lose 15 seconds, well, that's going to cause a massive effect on the race. So it's important that the team cover off any potential problems that they may have with the jacks or with any other part of the pit stop. Let's just watch these guys as they come in. Let's watch the rear jackman back here. You can see he sweeps in, and the jack is actually at an angle as it goes in here. He picks up the rear of the car, and there we go. The spare rear jackman here isn't needed, but he's ready to go in if he wants to. If you watch here, so the rear jackman goes in, and then the spare's right there and ready to go. So let's take a look at the front jackman. First of all, he's extremely brave because he's probably the only pit crew who, if Felipe goes past his marks, is going to get injured and taken out by that front wing. So he slots the jack in, pushes down on the jack as quickly as possible. It then locks itself. He moves across to the left-hand side so that it's out the way. So the jack will have a pivot on it. It's a very complex system mechanically. And then he drops it with a quick release system, and because he's already out the way, the jack comes out and Felipe goes on his merry way. So if we watch that again, we'll see that the spare jackman is here, ready to go in if there's a problem with the front jack, but there's not, so he just gets out the way as quickly as possible. Then the front jackman drops it and Felipe's back out into the pit lane. So all in all, it's incredibly quick how it happens, and I think when they practice the pit stops, these things just become natural. They just happen so quickly that it becomes instinctive for the pit crew. So next up, we're going to take a look at the front wing pit crew, the middle of the car pit crew who stabilise it, and the rear wing pit crew. So we're looking at this guy, these two in the middle, and the one coming in and working on the rear wing here, which you'll see now. This pit crew here. So let's take a look at the front two first of all. So these guys are here to make any front wing changes. If there's been any damage, they'll change the front wing. In this case, these two guys are making a front wing change. You can see that they're screwing something on the front wing. If there's nothing to do on the front wing during the pit stop, they'll actually clean the front wing, because if any rubber gets between the elements, with them being so close nowadays and with them being like 5 or 6 different elements in the front wing, if any rubber gets in there, it can really affect the efficiency of the front wing. So they'll make any wing angle changes, they'll change a damaged wing, or they'll simply just clean the front wing here. Next up, we have the two members of the pit crew in the center of the car here. Now, in this case, they're stabilizing the car. The jacks that the team use are only very narrow. The contact patch with the car is very narrow. So if you're picking it up from 2 narrow points, the car can sometimes wobble a little bit on the stand. So they're there to stabilize the car. they're also there if there's any debris in the radiator. So they'll nip inside the radiator and they'll pull out any debris that may be in the rad ducts. And finally, we have the rear wing pit crew member who is cleaning the main element of the rear wing, again, because if it has any rubber stuck to it, then it will become less efficient. And in the video here, you can see that he's wiping it clean with some special gloves before Felipe heads back out into the pit lane. So next up, we're going to take a look at probably the most exciting part of the pit stop, the pit crew who change the tyres. So let's take a look at the footage now, and we're going to take a close look at the 3 members of the pit crew that can change just one of the tyres. And don't forget, we've got another 3 tyres around the car, so that's a total of 12 pit crew members who are solely changing 4 tyres on the race car. So from the footage here, first of all, you can see we're on the front left, so you can see the board that's showing Felipe where the front tyres should stop, and that's what we're looking at here. You can see the markings on the floor here, which show for analysis afterwards, which will be something similar to this, how well Felipe stops on his marks during the pit stop. The other thing to note is that you can see that all of the pit crew have all of their attention down here. So just as when we're driving on track, it's important that you're looking a long way ahead of yourself. Well, these guys are all looking down the road, eyes fixated on the car that's coming towards them at 80 kilometers an hour. And any of you who've stood next to a road, you'll know how quick 80 kilometers an hour feels when a car is approaching you. As you can see here, the first guy to move is the wheel nut guy, and he's moved himself across to the right hand side here so that he can follow the wheel nut in and get on the wheel nut as quickly as possible. So as the car comes in, look, he's moving himself forwards in a sweeping motion, and already now he's following the wheel nut perfectly, gets on it and he pulls the trigger, and within a few moments the wheel is now coming off. He's come off, the wheel nut guy has come off the wheel nut here, and the wheel's coming off. Then the gentleman on the left here is putting the new tyre back on, and you can see that he actually rotates his arm around the outside, and look at how close those 2 tyres are. One comes off and we have 10 or 15 centimetres difference here. So the margins with the Williams Formula 1 team are so fine when we're changing the tyres. The tyre goes on smoothly here. You can see just this small gap. The wheel hasn't located quite as quickly as it could. Just watch it again. You see it comes on, and there's just a moment just there where it needs to locate, and then he pushes the tyre on. It's worth noting, and just going back a few moments, just to watch the wheel gun pit crew. Again, as you're following the wheel gun here, he follows the tyre back into and onto the hub, and is on it straight away, almost instantly. And this is how Williams consistently have the pit stop records during many of the Grand Prix. They just work so seamlessly together, and it all flows so nicely. Then, once the wheel gun is done, within a few tenths of a second, the gun's off, and the car's on its way once again. So actually, it's quite good to take note here. If we take the centre of the wheel as being here, Felipe stopped very, very well on his mark stage, just a few centimetres off. So the pit crew haven't needed to readjust. And as you can imagine, when they're in this position with their knees and they're on the ground in quite a strong position, which they need to be to put the forces through the wheel nut and into the wheel to do it up tightly, it's very difficult for them to move. If he was, for example, 20 or 30 centimetres to the left of the wheel nut pit crew, he would have to kind of shuffle across, and that's going to take massive amounts of time. So let's watch that again from another view, just to see how quickly and well synchronized the Williams F1 pit crew managed to change a tyre. So the final two pit crew members to analyse are the guys who control the release of the car back into the pit lane. Now it's incredibly important role. So you can see here, and when we go through the footage, you'll see that they don't look like they're actually doing too much. We have the guy at the front on the right hand side of the screen and the guy at the rear who are just standing there like gnomes, but they're taking in a lot of information, and they're critically important to how quick the pit stop is. If we first of all take a look at the pit crew member at the front of the shot here. Now he's controlling and looking out for when all of the pit crew are finished doing their jobs, if there's been any problems, and when it's safe to allow Felipe back out of the pit box. Now it's an incredibly difficult job because it all happens so quickly and the margins are so fine. So he's looking out for any problems, he's taking a wide view of the situation, and he controls the traffic light that Felipe is looking for. So as we saw on the onboard footage, there's a traffic light here that Felipe is just watching. As soon as he stops, he's just looking at this traffic light with the clutch in, ready to go as soon as he possibly can. And the pit crew member at the front right here is controlling that traffic light. So imagine his job in a 2-second pit stop. He's got to take in all this information, try and see when everybody's done, ensure that everybody's finished and there's no problems. If there's been a sticky wheel nut or something, maybe the pit stop's going to be a bit longer than normal, and he's got to watch out for that. And then the responsibility to set the light to green and release Felipe from the pit box. Now, as I said, it's very difficult and the margins are so fine that if it's 0.5 of a second slow, it's added probably 20 or 25% of time onto the pit stop. So you just think about how quick half a second is. His reactions have got to be incredibly fast, and he's got to absorb a massive amount of information. So he has a huge responsibility. Now, at the back of the car, we have another pit crew member who is controlling the release of the car. Now, a few years ago, Formula One changed the rules whereby you can't release your car into the pit lane if there's another car coming along the pit lane. Now, they do this with a marker on the pit wall, and if another car is past this marker, you can't release your car into the pit lane. The reason for this is safety. If you release the car when there's another car coming along, obviously you have a big potential for a crash, and with so many people in the pit lane, you know, it's unsafe to do that. So they release this rule, and now you can't just release your car into the path of another. So the pit crew member at the back is just watching if there's another car coming along the pit lane, and if there is, and he's past the point that Williams can't release their car, he'll override the pit crew member at the front of the car and actually hold the traffic light on red for that bit longer until the other car has come along the pit lane here, and then it's safe to release the Williams F1 and Felipe Massa back into the pit lane. So that's how 23 people work together seamlessly to change 4 wheels and tyres in less than 2 seconds.